Hello and welcome to a special series we are launching on NDTV Dialogues, The Road to Recovery. And who better to discuss this with than Nandan Nilekani, from Infosys to Aadhaar to many solutions, imagining India, rebooting India. He's somebody who has a solution for most of our problems. Nandan Nilekani, thanks very much for joining me on the NDTV Dialogues. Mr. Nilekani, when we're looking at the road to recovery, we're actually fighting two simultaneous challenges at this time. One, we are fighting, of course, with the health of Indians in the current coronavirus outbreak, and also fighting to get back to an economic and social health. How do you look at this? When you had talked years ago of rebooting India, how do we reboot at a time like this, which hasn't been imagined by anyone, governments around the world, policy planners, etc.? What are your suggestions?
Well, clearly this is an unprecedented crisis, once in 100 years kind of a crisis. Now, in the short term, obviously, we have to get our testing well done, enforce all the discipline of wearing masks, physical distancing and washing hands and so on, and trying to operate as many things as possible in a constrained way, because we can't let the economy go down. But I think the real bright spot to my mind is that a lot of vaccines are getting developed around the world. And I think by end of the year or early next year, we'll have a number of vaccines that are going to be safe, effective, and that can be rolled out at scale. So I think putting in place a vaccine delivery platform to reach 1 billion people will accelerate the point at which India will be past the pandemic.
And I think one of the focus here is also the Indian strength, the fact that India could also leverage to become part of what once was described as a global pharmacy, the fact that Indian companies are very much in that race. We've also got indigenous vaccines which are now being tested. How does India actually build on this? Because this is never an area we've actually looked at earlier.
Well, I think Indian companies and Indian R&D establishments have done a great job in vaccines, and people like the Serum Institute of the Poonawallas is an extraordinary company, which is the world's largest manufacturer of vaccines. So, and there are many more. There are at least 7 people who make vaccines, and we know that we have 4 or 5 going into clinical trials. So, yes, I think India is the vaccine capital of the world and can provide vaccines for the entire world, and of course for India. So we will have by early next year, I think, production which runs into millions of units. So then the challenge will be, how do we deliver this in a prioritized way to the people who need it the most and get things back to normal as fast as possible.
But Mr. Nilekani, does this also put the spotlight firmly on issues that have been neglected too far in the Indian political agenda? When we look at health, you're currently in Bengaluru, which of course we've seen the capital there, the state capital itself face issues that in India's Silicon Valley, we still have a situation where often you can't get to a hospital bed on time, or you have to wait for ambulances. And Bengaluru is still better off than many other parts of India, whether you look at Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, rural parts of India. Do we now need, when we are talking about rebooting, is this what needs to take center stage? India's health infrastructure, public health infrastructure, the fact that we're still 80% in private health dominates the health sector.
Yeah, I think the private health, public health is about health, delivery of healthcare, whereas public health is also about clean cities, about preventing pollution. It's really about providing vaccinations and treatments across the board. So there are many more elements to public health. But I think India is going through what the rest of the world is going through. I mean, we have seen the crisis in the United States, what happened in New York, and now what's happening in Florida and Texas. So I think all of the world countries have not been able to cope with the onslaught of this vaccine. So I think we have to see it in the global context. But you're right, this has brought focus on healthcare. And I do believe that many of the things that will be done now will facilitate better healthcare. I think we are seeing a lot of interest now in teleconsultation and so on. We have the whole rise of e-pharmacies, and there are many exciting things happening there. The Prime Minister has announced a National Digital Health Mission, and we'll have a superb state-of-the-art electronic health record system, which has not been done anywhere else, the way that India is planning, along with unique IDs for healthcare. So I think yes, this crisis has spurred a long-needed focus on health and healthcare.
I think that's an interesting point we made in the United States. The fact that the world's most developed country seemed to fail, currently actually has the highest number of deaths in the world. It seems to have failed abysmally in controlling the corona outbreak, the lives of citizens. Does it also look at redefining, when you look at political agendas, not just in India, but when you look at redefining modern day capitalism, that health, education necessarily need much more to be looking at public good rather than the element of profit in terms of healthcare and provision? You've seen European, more socialist states doing much better in some terms in that as well. And South Asia, the real example here.
Yeah. No, definitely, I think this raises fundamental issues of the role of public and private health. I mean, the US spends anywhere from 16 to 18% of GDP on health. It has the most sophisticated and best quality hospitals. But at the end of the day, it was not able to deal with this crisis. So clearly, it raises questions of what should be the priorities and how do we make affordable health and affordable education universally available to our people. So this has spurred a lot of fundamental questions about the balance between the public and the private sector in essential things like health and education.
You mentioned also the Prime Minister announced in his Independence Day speech the launch of the National Digital Health Mission, which sounds absolutely wonderful as an idea, as a concept. But you've seen it from your days at Aadhaar that whenever we talk about digital, a fundamental question about the access to it arises. And we're looking at it now when we talk about a digital divide in online schooling. A new study shows that 27% of students in government classes don't have access to, say, a device to get a digital education. So when we talk of a digital health mission in a country like India, where there are so many different standards of access, how do you actually look at that? And you, of course, face this whole controversy in Aadhaar as well. So you're well versed with the issues here.
There was no controversy in Aadhaar. It's perfectly fine. So anyway, I think the point is that I think a digital divide is something we should worry about. But digital divide does not mean having a device in everybody's hands. That'll take a long time. It's about providing access, which could be like a public call office, a customer service center where you go and access the healthcare. And so if you're able to, for example, create electronic health records of your diagnostics and your ECGs, EEGs and all that, and if they're all stored on a cloud, like a digital locker, and when you go to a new doctor for a consultation, if you can just pull out your records and show it to the new specialist for advice, that is something everybody can have. They don't need to have a device with themselves. So I think universal digital access does not necessarily mean a device in everybody's hands. It means that wherever they go, they can get access. For example, if you look at payments today, the people who have smartphones use UPI-based smartphone payments. The people who have feature phones can also use UPI. And the people who have no phones can go to an Aadhaar-enabled payment system, use their biometric and withdraw money. So you have to design it for universality, even when you're using a digital backbone.
No, I take the point that if you don't need a device necessarily for accessing a universal health system. But when you look at issues, and of course you've talked about education as well and looked at solutions. When we look at what's going on currently with online classes or education, how do we address those inequalities which arise?
Well, again, I think online classes, we tend to think that it is about a phone and looking at a video of a teacher. I think it's much more than that. And if you look at the government's Prime Minister's eVidya program, which is backed by the Diksha infrastructure, it allows people to be offline. It allows people to use their textbooks and a local phone. It allows people to go to a village school, village computer service center and access there. In some states, people are printing out the worksheets and giving it to people who don't have devices. So we have to think through all these. What do you do with people who have phones, no phones? How do you deliver it to them? So I think a lot, and then you can use the television, you can use the radio. So I think we have to look at it in a more holistic manner. It's not just about one device and watching a teacher.
No, I agree. And I think actually perhaps a policy for across India rather than it going state by state, maybe one way when we look forward. We've talked, Mr. Nilekani, and of course, famously Thomas Friedman had quoted you in his book, The World is Flat, saying that you had given him that initial idea on how the global playing field is now leveled. When we look at the global playing field now and India at a time of unique geopolitics, at a time when we see India banning Chinese apps, the US also expressing concern and looking at a possible ban, Where do we go from here in time of globalization? Can this be India's chance to step into a vacuum, or do you think banning is not the way to go forward?
Well, I think India has a huge chance. You're right. We had a period of untrammeled globalization, starting with the fall of the Berlin Wall, which happened in the same year that India had liberalization, 1991. And from 1991, for about 30 years, we've had globalization. China joined the WTO. Economic growth was fueled by global trade and so on. And then in the last few years, we have had this kind of reaction to globalization. And then now you're seeing the whole China-US divide. I think India has a great chance. For example, I think manufacturing in India now becomes viable because everyone wants to have an optionality and not put all their manufacturing in China. We are already seeing with smartphones and large smartphone vendors are now talking about increasing their production in India. The major contract manufacturing firms like Foxconn are planning big things in India. So I think this is a great opportunity for India because India is seen as far more neutral. It's seen as a company that has no imperial ambitions. And I think this is a great chance for India to navigate through the situation and carve out its own role in the world.
But how do we actually talk about ease of doing business? And you, of course, knew this from your days earlier at Infosys when Mr. Narayan Murthy had talked about waiting in the corridors of Delhi and how long it used to take. Of course, you come a long way from that. But still, the ease of doing business in India, that many startups still want to go to Singapore to actually register to set up. How do we actually get companies in? You already heard that Vietnam is emerging as more attractive destinations. What would be your recommendations to actually get companies to come here to India?
Well, I think, it'll take some time to get everything in order, but certainly we have all these coastal areas. For example, Chennai has turned out to be a huge manufacturing base. Sri City, which is across the border in Andhra Pradesh, has also done a lot of. So I think if we can create a supply chain where the manufacturing is done, the goods are shipped effectively to a local port and can be shipped out, we don't necessarily wait for the whole country to be at that level. So I think a bit of strategic thinking here can help us to accelerate manufacturing and job creation and leverage the fact that the world is looking for options.
I think that a bit of acceleration is important because, if we take it as kind of business as usual, we have to really seize the opportunity at this time. But just looking also at the current situation, I mean, we know this again globally. The UK is now in recession. Japan is seeing its worst GDP. And we had Mr. Narayan Murthy say just now that, India's GDP could be as low as it was in 1947. Is the pain going to get much worse now in the months ahead before it gets better? What do you see as happening now?
No, I think we do have a period when we will have pain, and that's the combination of the COVID crisis and the consequential economic situation caused due to lockdowns and so on. And cities will start and stop. I mean, they'll get back to working and then some incident will happen and then again do some lockdown. So we're going to have that, which is why I keep saying that having the vaccination strategy in place so that we can vaccinate the entire country as soon as possible, as soon as we have some viable and safe vaccines, is really the only way I can think of as a permanent solution to create a vaccine-induced herd immunity.
Mm-hmm. Do you see this also when we talk about GDP and jobs? Because we just had a new report come out of the CMIE, which has pointed to the number of loss of salary jobs just in the month of July. And we've talked, of course, of economic packages of 20 lakh crores, the government says. But on the ground, it's still hard for businesses to get the capital they need. MSMEs who are meant to drive the economy to get the working capital they need. What do we need to do urgently to fix the job situation? You, of course, used to talk of the demographic dividend and what happens if you don't get that right. India is currently, you had predicted in 2020, the youngest country in the world. How do we fix that as our urgent priority?
No, I think that's why all the plans for digital lending or database lending are very important. Just recently, I talked about Open Credit Enabling Network, which is a protocol for lenders to connect electronically with borrowers through intermediaries that are called as loan service providers. And increasingly, lending will have to be based on data. Fortunately, there's a lot of data. Companies today pay taxes. They have the GST invoice details. They have the transaction details. So we need to completely reimagine credit in a digital world and allow millions of small businesses to leverage their digital footprints to get access to credit. And if you do that, I think you're creating the momentum for reviving the economy, because millions of small businesses get access to credit based on their business performance. You'll definitely see a lot of revival, and they in turn will create lots of jobs.
But do you see this as happening, Nandan Nilekani? Often digital is seen as a panacea for problems, make in India, etc. We have lots of slogans of different governments, so this is not political. But when you talk about digital, it still seems, I mean, again, as I said, we saw what happened. That often we saw the migrant exodus, which back home to walking for hours, walking for days. We see them now coming back to cities. It seems almost a contradiction when we talk of digital India in these terms, when there's so many different Indias which are currently facing a different reality.
No, I think it's step by step. I mean, look, we had 1.25 billion people on Aadhaar, and that ability to DBT during the crisis was a very fundamental ability that even Western countries don't have. We have a payment system in both UPI and Aadhaar-enabled payment, which is world class. We have the account aggregator framework for leveraging your data for lending. We have this open credit network. So I think these are all building blocks. My point is, you asked me how do we revive. I'm saying that we need to have a new paradigm of lending using data, and all the infrastructural pieces have now been put in place. It's now a question of accelerating that.
You, of course, Nandan, are a data man. When you look at data and you look at the current cases in Bengaluru as well, and again, you've earlier worked with the state government, etc., on public-private partnerships on getting Bengaluru back. What would you say in terms of data? Where does Bengaluru stand now in terms of just corona cases? I know you're not a doctor, but what do you think we should be looking at as possible solutions beyond the vaccine we talked about in the beginning, of looking at actually getting our cities back to business?
Well, I think in the short term, we have to obviously accelerate testing. And it's good to see that in the last few weeks, testing volumes in Bengaluru as well as around the country have gone up dramatically. That's a good sign. And we're using all the rapid antigen testing and so on. So I think testing is a good thing. I think we have to continue to do contact tracing. Now, it becomes very complex to do contact tracing because a lot of people are not willing to come forward and say that they met somebody who had, who has been afflicted, because they in turn are worried about the way they'll get quarantined and so on. So I think these are all human issues. They're not, but I think the good news is that many cities seem to have got their hands around it. I mean, Mumbai, the whole Dharavi experience has been extraordinary. What they have done. Delhi seems to be getting better, and hopefully Bangalore will get better in a few weeks.
Right, and of course, one thing that has been a complete paradigm shift and a digital paradigm shift has been how India works. Working from home has now become the new normal for so many parts. I'm sure for Infosys as well. We know that Facebook and Google are already saying that people won't come back to work in the middle of next year. Is this a new normal? Do you think it works? Does it work in productivity? Is it good working from home?
Well, Infosys has 240,000 employees in 40 countries, and all of them are working from home, and that transition happened within a matter of weeks, and 99% of the people are working from home. Right now, the productivity is good, the morale is good, but in the long term, I think it may not be sustainable. So once things get better, we'll probably come to a hybrid model where people will certainly come to office, and on some days they will work from home. So it will be a seamless mix of working from home and working from office, because coming to the office has social benefits, it develops social capital, develops networks, it creates serendipity for ideas and innovation. So there's no substitute for all of us meeting and sharing ideas. So I think while this working from home will continue till for some more time, for some more months, the steady state will be a balance between working from home and office.
When would you feel that it would be safe to get employees back to work, do you think? Any thoughts on that yet?
Well, we do have a very small fraction of essential employees going to work right now. I would say it's less than 5%. But I think I personally feel that's why I'm so keen about the vaccination. I think the vaccines come and our friends like the Poonawallas deliver on all the vaccines they're going to manufacture. Sometime in early next year, we should see vaccinations happening. And while the government obviously will vaccinate frontline health workers and so on, it's entirely possible that corporates will vaccinate all their employees and their families because it's in their interest to get a fully vaccinated workforce.
Right.
And that will be sometime in the, I would say, the first half of 2021.
Okay, no, that's interesting also, and it plays out. And of course, we talked earlier about China, US divide, etc. But you've also got the US kind of crackdown on immigrants, immigration, and H-1B visas. Is that something which impacts, as we talked about the earlier model of globalization and a very different model now of much more of protect our own first? How do you think that plays out with what you see as 21st century globalization today or 2020 globalization?
No, as we said, after about 30 years of untrammeled globalization, now we are seeing some pushback, and the constraints being put on work visas is part of that. Fortunately, Infosys is fully de-risked because it went on a huge campaign to hire local people, hired more than 10,000 Americans in the last 2-3 years, local centers. So it doesn't affect a company like Infosys, but broadly, yes, I think the putting limits on the movement of skilled personnel will definitely have a negative impact on globalization.
And finally, Nandan Nilekani, how has life changed for you? What's the new normal for someone I know can never sit still? Have you been confined at home? How has life changed for you?
Well, actually, I'm quite fine. I mean, I have a nice home in Bangalore. I have a park nearby for walks. I have friends like you. I can do an interview whenever I want. So I'm doing fine. Thank you.
Excellent. And thanks very much, Nandan Nilekani. As I said, it's always wonderful to hear ideas from you. It was great speaking to you on the NDTV Dialogues, looking at a road to recovery. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you very much.